Idra the rogue, Dawn the cleric, Leyland the wizard, and Ulrich the barbarian are traversing a dungeon, hunting down the phylactery of Grigit, a powerful and evil lich. It's dark, musty, and with only the torchlight to guide them, the party is on edge. The undead minions left behind by Grigit to wear down invaders have all been dispatched with ease, and the party, though too fearful to admit it openly, is starting to gain confidence. They might actually make it out of this alive. The hallway they're following rounds a corner, and suddenly Idra hears a click beneath his foot. He turns to react, but it's too late. The corridor's walls suddenly burst into movement, slamming together with a sickening crunch. Ulrich leaps back into Dawn's arms as he narrowly escapes the trap himself. The walls start sliding back into place, and the party stares down at Idra's mutilated and gruesome remains, barely able to breathe. Your rogue player is furious, and he accuses you of cheating. But you weren't cheating. Idra the rogue failed to spot the trap in time, and after failing his reflex save too, how could it be your fault? Intelligent, powerful villains set traps to kill invaders, not to maim. It was, after all, completely logical. So the question is, were you cheating? That's what we're going to talk about today. So, I hope you guys are ready. Let's get started. Welcome, adventurers. My name is Cody. This is Taking 20, a channel about all things role-playing games. Today I want to talk about traps and why using them is cheating, but also how to use them without cheating, which can actually be done. In 2006, Goodman Games published an adventure for the Dungeon Crawl Classics line called the Dread Crypt of Srihaz. If you've never played one of these Dungeon Crawl Classics, I have to tell you, they are a tremendous amount of fun. Usually these were sort of grindy dungeons or caves filled with monsters that sometimes made sense and other times were there just to be another encounter. The heyday for this particular line was during the 3rd edition of Dungeons & Dragons, and beyond the old school mentality of gritty dungeons filled with monsters to be defeated and looted, the other thing that these modules were famous for was their traps. The Dread Crypt of Srihaz is an archaic crypt for Srihaz, a vampire king of ancient lineage and a master of exotic sorceries from mysterious kingdoms beyond the knowledge of men. The crypt's vast fortune is used to lure the characters through the traps and minions that Srihaz has set out with the hope of weakening them enough so Srihaz can easily feed on them. And I don't think that it's a stretch to say that this particular adventure did that very well. Of the 32 encounters listed at the front of the book, 22 of them have the word trap in their description, quite a few of those more than once, and one of the few that doesn't includes a mimic. Early in the crypt, there is a trap, referred to as the freezing trap. The players follow a corridor that ends in a small T-shaped room. A few feet before they enter the room, the players find a bit of script that reads, "He who would take power must be cold, dispassionate, and merciless." If someone enters the room, nothing happens. But as soon as 4 warm bodies enter the room, a granite door slams down behind the PCs and traps them inside. I'm going to paraphrase here, but the door weighs about 1,800 pounds and cannot be lifted, as the players can't even get their fingers underneath of the door. Swords, of course, will break, and if crowbars are used, players still run the risk of having their fingers crushed. The room's temperature begins to drop rapidly. Every 2 rounds, it falls another 10 degrees. Once the temperature hits 0 degrees, the players begin to take non-lethal damage. Once the room falls to negative 20 degrees, the PCs begin to take lethal damage with no save. And the room's temperature continues to drop until it hits negative 120 degrees. And the worst part of this trap, I'll just read directly for you. Any magical or mundane fires are immediately extinguished once the spell begins, and they cannot be rekindled. Any spell-like abilities, mundane alchemical tricks, or magic items which directly create warmth of any kind fail for the duration of the spell with no save. This is the second room in this particular adventure. For the record, the only way to survive this trap is to either not trigger it or by physically breaking down the stone slab door before fatigue and death take you. This, my fellow dungeon masters and game masters, is cheating in 98% of games being run. The problem with traps in games like Dungeons & Dragons and Starfinder is the way that they are implemented. Either they kill you or they don't, and while that might seem obvious, neither outcome is overly rewarding for either the players or to the dungeon master. Let me explain. In theory, most traps, unless they are designed to entrap their prey, should try and kill their intended target. And the only way for your PCs to try and defeat your trap is by spotting it and avoiding it. The problem here, you as the dungeon master are your player's eyes, ears, and senses. You're also the person who put the trap there. If you set a deadly trap and then have it kill a PC, they're gonna feel cheated. And having your players feel like their choices don't matter is perhaps the worst thing that can happen in your game. Whereas on the other hand, if you have your players fall into a pit just to take a bit of bludgeoning damage, then your trap has become nothing more than a tax. It's a nuisance and nothing more than a toll that they have to pay to cross a bridge. And as for avoiding pit traps, an interesting game it does not make. And to be clear here, traps can be puzzles and puzzles can be traps, but not all puzzles are traps, nor traps puzzles. Hopefully that clears things up a bit for you. Puzzles are something different entirely. Puzzles, as traps, can be used to build encounter, which again is something entirely different than a simple spiked pit and trapdoors that drop into pools of acid. But even though I believe that instead of adding a trap, your game would benefit further from simply creating another encounter, whether that be social or combat, I do actually think that traps have a place in Dungeons & Dragons. So if you really want to include traps in your game, here are a few Dungeon Master tips to keep in mind. Number 1, foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is a very important tool for Dungeon Masters. And when it comes to using traps in your games without cheating or simply giving the player the answer, this must be utilized. What if Idra hadn't simply made his spot check to notice the floor plate trigger, but instead had noticed a patch of dry blood on the wall up ahead? This is something that you shouldn't need your rogue to actually make a check for. But if you still want them to make a check, or if you want to make a check for them in secret, then perhaps they notice instead strange scratches along the floor. This allows you to transform the trap from a terrible form of cheating to an encounter. It's no longer a save or lose your character scenario, but instead it's a way for you to challenge your players. How do they cross the corridor without letting the walls crush them? What do they do when they're looking over the situation and a group of wights come screaming down the hallway behind them? This is not cheating. This is the right way to use traps in your game. So foreshadow your traps and show your players the patches of dry blood, the skeletal remains that have been sliced in half, and the tinge of green in the room that has boiled up from the pool of acid down below. Number 2, don't let your traps become a tax. If you ever come to a point when designing a delve or a dungeon and you decide to put a trap in it because you think you need something else or that you need to mix it up for your players, don't do it. This is a Dungeon Master trap. If you have a villain that you think would place traps to protect their layers, then use traps. Foreshadow them and create encounters. But if you're just using a trap because you think your PCs will breeze through your planned adventure and you want to whittle them down, then you need to create more challenging encounters. If you want your players to have fewer hit points when they go into your boss fight, then throw minions at them. That way they at least have some player agency over what happens during the throes of combat. but taxing them with a pit trap here and a falling rock trap there is never a good decision. Number 3 is be flexible. If your PCs end up in a trap that might TPK them, you should be very open-minded with how they can deal with it and escape. If a player says they want to jam their weapons in gears or slots, be open-minded. If your players want to use magic in a creative way to escape, be open-minded. And if players give answers to riddles that might actually work, but that aren't the specific answer you wrote down, be open-minded and let that answer stop the sand from filling up the room. If your players find themselves in a trap that you created, and then you tell them no, 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 no to every solution that they try to come up with, well, that is going to feel an awful lot like cheating to them. And finally, guys, number 4 is to set the right expectations. Want to know what the other 2% of games are where the freezing room trap is not cheating? Well, that's in games like Dungeon Crawl Classics. As you guys know, setting the right expectations for your group is the most important thing that you can do as a dungeon master or as a game master. And if, and only if, you and your players are on the same page that you want to play a meat grinder or trap-filled adventure that everyone will die in, then by all means, go for it. That sounds like a lot of fun. I've played in those games and they can be a lot of fun. On the other hand, if you and your players are trudging along through a 6-month campaign in the Forgotten Realms where they have never faced anything more than a few poison dart traps and a mimic that caught them by surprise admittedly, and you suddenly pancake one with a save or die trap, that is cheating. So I'm sure you guys are going to have a lot to say this week, which of course is okay. You're even allowed to tell me that I'm wrong and that you love killing your PCs with spinning saw blades out of nowhere. But I also want to know if you guys like to use trap constantly in your game or not. Though if you do feel that way, do me a favor and let us all know what edition you're playing currently and what edition you started with. I'd really like to know that particular information. So I want to thank my badass patrons who are supporting the show. If you guys want to learn how to support the show, I'll put a link down to the Patreon in the description down below. We've got a lot of new and exciting things going on over there, and the community in PC is helping me create some really fun rewards for you guys that are supporting the channel. If this is your first time here and you love role-playing games as much as I do, I'd love to have you subscribe. Every week I'll be putting out new videos on GM tips, player tips, tutorials, and more. So if that sounds like something you might be interested in, just hit that subscribe button down below and come join us. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Cody, and may your games be filled with awesome memories and even better friends. I'll catch you guys next time.